Welcome to the Spider-Man 77 Fan Show podcast. I'm your host, Paul Rogers, and joining me today is Adrian Sherlock, the author of the Amazing Spider-Man Complete Series Guidebook. Adrian's book looks at each episode, the people involved, and the legacy left behind. It's a fascinating read that features an amazing cover by artist Kevin Langle. Welcome to the podcast, Adrian, author of the Amazing Spider-Man Complete Series Guide. Copy here. And it's a great book that sort of has a great overview of the series, how it was received and how the public have received it. And it's a great breakdown of each episode and people involved. It's not your first book, though. You've done a lot of books over the years.
Yeah, my sort of writing career has kind of been funny. You know, I sort of had ambitions to be this novelist when I was young and possibly write for film or television as well. And it didn't kind of work out. And I sort of, in my 30s, gave up all of my ambitions and thought, well, I'll do something sensible and become a school teacher. So I taught English for 20 years. And then my teaching work sort of ended, and I felt myself at a sudden loose end. And I'd done a little bit of writing as a sort of a side thing, you know, where just as a hobby almost, because I had this journalism qualification. I'd studied a whole degree at university and I'd never used it. I was sort of halfway through my journalism degree, and we were talking about how bad news sells, and I'm a person who likes to be positive. You know, I never liked negativity, so I kind of thought, well, I can't go around with a bad news sells attitude, you know.
Yeah.
So maybe journalism's not for me. So I gave up for 20 years and became a teacher. And then, teaching, as I say, ended. But along the way, what I'd done at one point, I'd heard about how Amazon allowed you to publish a short read, you know, a sort of you can read this in under 20 minutes or something, or in an hour, because it's an ebook. I thought, oh, that's interesting. I thought, I'll try a few ebooks. So this was in 2013, so 13 years ago we're talking. I thought to myself, oh, I'll write a few of these little short reads. I'll just do about 3 of them and 3 or 4 of them and see what happens, you know. And the one that people responded to was about Quatermass, the
Alan Quatermass?
1950s BBC science fiction serial.
All right.
Yeah, sort of a sci-fi horror thing, a bit like influenced the X-Files and Doctor Who and things like that.
Uh-huh.
But of course, some people liked it, and you get some reviews where people say, well, it's only a short read, it's too short, I want more, you know. So gradually over the years, I expanded it into a complete book, and then did second and third drafts. I found I had some typos in there, so I had to go back and, you know, fix it up. And so it was all a bit of a learning curve.
Yeah.
And then in 2018, I thought, one of my favorite shows was Jerry Anderson's Space 1999. So I thought all the press that got, all the reviews were negative. And again, I hate this bad news sells mentality in the media.
Yeah.
So I thought, I'm going to write a book about Space 1999, and I'm going to be really positive. I'm going to talk about the good points and why I love it, and the things I see in it that maybe other people, or at least other reviewers, haven't really talked about so much. And people responded well to that. So in 2022, just at the very end of 2022, I found my teaching career had kind of ended abruptly, and I was at a loose end, and I sat down at the kitchen table and said, I'm going to do more writing. And I kind of had the idea of, well, you know, if there's one of those TV shows like The Amazing Spider-Man, or Sapphire and Steel, UFO, Blake 7, V, or The $6 Million Man, if someone mentions a certain name of a show, and my first reaction is, oh, I love that show, you know, I thought that's the kind of thing I should write about, because I love it other people love it, I can write positively about it. Particularly if things didn't get kind of the respect that they deserved on first broadcast,
A bit like Spider-Man, yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm surprised,
I really
actually, saying that about Space 1999. Actually, to be honest, I've never watched it. It was a wee bit before my time, but it's sort of thing. It's always in the it's always in the background. Something is always assumed it had a cult following and that it was successful. But obviously, you say it's not. It wasn't the case then back when it was.
Oh, it was successful in terms of popularity and ratings.
Yeah, but reviews.
It just got bad reviews.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But it got slammed by critics who took a sort of, I guess you could say, a sort of intellectual snobbery sort of attitude towards it.
Yeah.
Because it was very expensive. It had brilliant production values, and but it had a sort of it had a mix. It had a mix of hard science that was sort of near future. If NASA put a colony on the moon, and that was all very realistic. But it was mixed with a sort of science fantasy thing where they had to have a sort of an adventurous element. So they put in that the moon gets blasted out of Earth's orbit, passes through space-time warps and things like that, and even goes into a black hole and comes out a white hole on the other side of the universe.
Yeah.
And ends up, even being influenced by different alien intelligences to go to mysterious places and end up meeting all sorts of life forms and having adventures. So,
you've sold it to me now. I have to watch it now. So
yeah. Well, the special effects guy was Brian Johnson, and he said at the end of the first season, he got told there was two guys in the studio who wanted to talk to him, and they asked him a whole lot of questions about the way he did his effects, and at the end of them, they offered him a job, and it was to be special effects director on Star Wars, and one of the guys was George Lucas, and that was who offered him the job, and he said, I've just signed up for season 2, so they hired John Dykstra instead, but then John Dykstra and George Lucas parted ways, so Brian Johnson took over then as special effects director on Empire Strikes Back, and thereafter. So so this series had production values and special effects that influenced George Lucas and Star Wars.
Well, there you go. Yeah. So as far as the Spider-Man series goes, how long have you been a fan of the show?
Well, pretty much from day one, because when I was a boy, I'd been watching Spider-Man. The one that had Filmation, I think it was, made the series with the great song.
The '67 show, wasn't it?
Spider-Man does whatever a spider can,
Yeah.
And I used to love that, and I was, really just enjoyed the character and enjoyed his adventures, and so I had been watching the Filmation Spider-Man series of cartoons.
Yeah.
And I think I may have read the comics at that point. And I suppose this would have been 1977 when I was 10, or going on 11 or something.
Yeah.
Because I was born at the end of 66. So this ad came on my television set, and it was, "You've read about him. You've heard about him. Now for the first time, the Spider-Man comes to the big screen." Yeah. And I was like, what? And the thing you've got to understand is I didn't have parents who were the kind of people who just indulged my whims, and we were not regular cinema goers at all. Mm-hmm. So it was one of those moments where I wanted to do something so badly that my enthusiasm and determination was it was so strong that my parents went, okay. They didn't argue, Very rare that ever happened, but no, my mother was great about it. She said, well, it's the school holidays coming up, and obviously the film had probably been released for school holidays, so that would have been the timing. So she organized me and my little brother to go, and what she did was she suggested it to her sister, my aunt. So And she said, oh, yeah, great. So two of my cousins, two boys, Mark and Anthony, went with me and my brother Chris. So the four of us got dropped off at the cinema. And while we were at the cinema, Mum stayed and had a visit with her sister.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of worked out, much to my amazement.
And that was for the pilot or the first movie? Was it the...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And as I say in the book, the movie was just incredibly exciting. It was rough around the edges.
Yeah.
You know, you could see that some of the visual effects didn't work because they were using, it looked like videotape chroma key.
Yeah, they did, yeah.
Which is the primitive green screen, where they used a yellow backdrop. So there would be a yellow outline around Nicholas Hammond or possibly a double when it was Spider-Man. For a few shots, I think most notably it was in the scene where he goes outside of the window of his Aunt May's house and climbs around the house in his civvies rather than in his Spider-Man costume, which he hasn't made yet. It really, you could see that it was fake. So there were moments which didn't look good.
Yeah, it was very strange because I've been doing a lot of work with 35mm footage, and there are actually, you can see, I know the parts you're talking about where they transferred it to videotape, did the special effects, and then transferred it back to film. So it still had that video NTSC intermediate, but they even did it with some scenes that didn't have special effects. There's a few scenes, that it must have been just done by mistake, but I know what you mean. So it really, I suppose on a cinema screen, it would have really shown up.
Oh yeah. I mean, even when you're a 10-year-old, you know when you're looking at stuff that looks a bit crap, In fact, I think kids are more sensitive to it than adults. As an adult, I'll watch an old Doctor Who or something from the 1970s, and I'll let the bad green screen go by.
Suspend your belief. Yeah.
I'm focused on the story or the acting or whatever. But as a kid, I would really cringe sometimes. But once we got past a few of those shots, I have to say, when it was Fred War going up a building on a very thin line and very well hidden. I don't know how they managed to do it, but they did a fantastic job of hiding the wires.
Yeah.
That were obviously quite thin and were lifting him, and his point of view shots and the fight scenes, they were mesmerizing.
Yeah.
The scene where he first enters Byron's building, he comes in through the window and he's confronted with the three guys in black with those I guess kendo.
The kendo killers, like they've been. I don't know who's coined that term, but that's what they're called, the kendo killers.
Yeah. So the great thing about that was, at that time, I think 1977, Bruce Lee was a big thing. So there was this sort of perception that if someone knew martial arts, they were deadly and lethal in a fight in a way that no one here in the West was, that they were really almost superhumanly dangerous people, So when he comes up against these three guys who appear to be martial artists, it was like, oh, wow, he's in trouble now,
Yeah.
So as a kid, I was on the edge of my seat. And, I remember that scene.
I think too,
suddenly...
Before that, I'm struggling to think of something, there was no real comic book movies or shit before that, apart from maybe Wonder Woman. The Hulk hadn't. Well, I suppose it had come out at that time on television, but I think Spider-Man the pilot preceded it by a few months, But that would have been in the States, over in the UK, and I suppose Australia would have had a different. I know in the UK. The series didn't air until 81, and the Hulk was probably around the same time, maybe.
Yeah. I remember the Hulk. I always watched the Hulk. I enjoyed the show, but nothing was as magical as Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that moment where they first go, Byron says, kill him, and then they move in, and suddenly he just leaps up and he's onto the ceiling above them, and then spins around and starts walking back behind them.
And still had it quite well. Yeah.
I couldn't believe my eyes. It was such a great illusion. I just couldn't believe my eyes.
Yeah.
What happened? I was like, seriously, it was magic. It was just sheer screen magic. And I mentioned this in the book. The like the high level shots or high rise shots, from the rooftop of big buildings in America.
Mm-hmm.
When you see them on a cinema screen, not in a 4:3 format television on a cathode ray screen, but seeing them on a big cinema screen, it was breathtaking. It was really mind-boggling, particularly to a kid.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe what I was seeing, because I realize now that they actually very cleverly built false ledges and false extra parts of rooftops, propped up by wooden supports, so that Fred Waugh could give a wave and seemingly leap over the ledge off the side of a building.
Yeah.
Really, he's just leaping off a fake ledge that they've set up on the roof, and leaping onto a mattress. But to me as a kid watching it, the camera angle made it completely convincing, because it was set up on an actual rooftop.
Yeah.
I'm like, he's just leapt off the damn roof with just nothing but a white string, of web,
Yeah, especially that one where he swings from building to building, like a proper swing. It's not
right.
just
The editor cut straight to that shot of him swinging from one building to another building. Yeah, and it was.
And they reused that quite a few times throughout the series. Same shot.
Yeah. It was expensive and got reused a bit. Yeah.
So did you see the series when it first aired then over in Australia?
I did, but the thing was that they showed the 3 movies first. So what happened was, it was one movie each year for 3 years at the cinema, and I went and saw the second one, which is probably my favorite, Spider-Man Strikes Back, which is the Deadly Dust 2-parter. That had that wonderfully meta sort of scene where they go to an old Western ghost town, which is actually a movie set.
Yeah.
And had that just allowed for so much great action. Because even as a kid, you pick up that the Western style music has a certain boingy sort of
Morricone sort of
humorous quirk to it,
I think that was
annoys you because you're taking it so seriously as a kid,
Yeah, because I think, as I say before, the UK and Australia probably had a similar exposure to the series, whereas, if you didn't catch it on the first airing, you didn't see it. Whereas, it'd be because syndicated over in the States, it would have been repeated over and over. So I know myself, I didn't even know it was a series until I was in my 20s. Yeah, or maybe,
Yeah, I actually thought it was 3 movies at first. And then when the series came on, they showed the first series, I think, Saturday nights in Australia. Of course, it's only a short run.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, having loved the movies, I watched them. Some of the individual episodes, they were good, but not as good as the movie-length ones, I thought. But they were still good. I was still hanging on everything that was going on because it was Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And then it went off the air, and I think they then were showing them late, about 11 o'clock on a weeknight. I caught maybe season 2 of it. So I got to see, I always remember this one where a guy had like a drug which controlled minds. I thought that's similar to Mr. Byron's plan,
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course he causes more trouble, with mind control. So
so was that that was a re-airing, was it then, or was that just the original airing?
Yeah, that was the first airing. Yeah, so I think the second season only aired late at night.
Yeah,
but I can remember on a Friday during the school holidays they showed the Dragons Challenge on TV. This would have been a few years later again. So we're probably into the 80s by this point, and their sort of TV movie presenter, he said Nicholas Hammond's a very good actor, and he said of the movies derived from the series, this is the most polished and accomplished movie, and it's really quite a enjoyable film,
Mm-hmm.
And I remember seeing it that afternoon and thinking, oh yeah, great. So I loved it all over again,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you discovered yourself that it was a series, obviously you saw it in the first airing, but in writing the book, then did you have to go back and sort of refresh your mind, or was there some stuff, was there things about the series that maybe you discovered for writing the book that maybe you hadn't thought about before?
Yeah, I think that's often the case. A lot of things you don't realize as a child. Like, I mean, one of my favorite movies was Beverly Hills Cop, and it never occurred to me that Jenny in Beverly Hills Cop is Judy from the first
Oh yeah,
Spider-Man
yeah, Lisa
movie.
Eilbacher, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So so things like that. So that's always amazing, and of course. Finding out that Ted Danson was in, I think, Dragon's Challenge, or
That's right, yeah.
Chinese
Chinese
Web,
Web.
as it was called on TV. Yeah, but no, I one thing I really became aware of too was how differently I perceived the whole Spider-Man series compared to Americans, because they never saw it in the cinema.
Yeah, that's right.
They only ever saw it on TV. And I realized that seeing the first film, and then the two-parter, and then the last big story, all as cinema screenings, had left me with an impression that was very different to people who just watched on a cathode ray screen.
Yeah, and I think too, those three isolated on their own, that there is like a theme that flows through them, and it is around Peter and how he can't get involved with anybody, and he has to play the card sometimes, and
yeah,
which is interesting. Whereas the TV series maybe doesn't, as a long form, doesn't maybe dwell on that as much. When you see it, spread out as such. It's like the movies distill a lot more of that, maybe, don't they?
I think I mentioned in the section of the book about where I talked about Spider-Man in the cinema, how it was perceived. One of the things that really struck me was that, it was that thing of when you're young, particularly if you want to be liked by girls or something, and just be popular in general, the most frustrating thing, which really does your head in as a teenager or a kid, is when you feel completely misunderstood. And I always remember, he would, some bad guys turn up, he would sprint away to get turned into his Spider-Man costume and come back as, I've turned into Spider-Man, and save the day. And then, get told off by the pretty girl who he sort of seems to be liking, who, oh, you're a coward, you ran away, Peter, shame on you, and he has that thing where it's like, if I could just tell you, if I could just make you understand, if only you understood. I had to do that. I wanted to help, but I can't tell you that I'm Spider-Man. And that was something that was so close to my heart. I really felt connected to this guy. It really, that's part of the magic of Spider-Man, and I mentioned that in the book. I think that I wrote that he has this sort of dichotomy almost, where he's, on the one hand, it's like a wish fulfillment. If only I could be Spider-Man, if only I could do those really cool magical things he can do, climb a building and leap up magically almost to the ceiling and spin around and crawl away and astonish people and, be so cool, And yet at the same time, he's so relatably pained and conflicted and lonely and misunderstood. And, he's got all this sort of angst, I guess you could say. I don't like, maybe that's wrong word, because we hear about teen angst all the time in shows, and it that sounds like it's reducing it to a common thing. And No, the way Peter Parker was presented was uncommon. I thought it had an accuracy to it that was just very relatable without getting cliched or anything like that.
Hmm. So in writing the book, then information is sort of thin on the ground for the series.
Yeah, yeah.
Had you any difficulties doing any research for it, or where did you go for
Yeah,
research?
I think it is. I think it is hard to find information about it. One of the great things was Nicholas Hammond moved to Australia.
Hmm.
So I was very excited by that when I found out that he'd moved over here. Um, but as a result, of course, he doesn't, he didn't for a long time have a lot of involvement with, I guess, the American media or anything like that. And the Australian media weren't interested in Spider-Man
Yeah.
for a lot of years. Certainly not before the Tobey Maguire films. So yeah, but I have a pretty good memory, and I remember reading about the series at the time. I read all the reviews. It used to frustrate me that the reviews were negative. And the funny thing is, when a character is kind of an underdog who's misunderstood, and then the reviews say the show about him, they seem to be misunderstanding it. You know what I mean? It
Yeah, I never
feels
thought of
like
that. Yeah, that's a good point.
they're abusing the underdog. You know what I mean? And as I say, I've never liked the bad news sells kind of journalism. I've
Yeah.
always liked looking for the positive, and I've always wanted to be if I'm going to write journalism, I want to be a entertainment journalism. It seemed the one area where I could always look for the positive, and as I did with Space 1999, it had been maligned by critics, and I wanted to talk about the good points.
Yeah.
So again, it was wanting to talk about the good points of the series. Also, everyone, myself included, thinks this series deserves to be restored and put out on Blu-ray or something like that, or DVD
Yeah.
or something. So I thought maybe writing about it might give it some publicity. It might, be a testing of the waters. I'm sure no one, in Sony or wherever cares what I do, but it would be nice. It would be nice to think that we've kind of proven that there is some enthusiasm for
Yeah,
this show
100%.
still.
Yeah. As to say, like I run the website trying to just keep the positivity and, awareness
Mm.
out there for it. And it's that's why it's so thrilling to have books like yours coming out, and even other
Oh,
people, even fans making custom figures. I know, although we're starting to get figures now officially released, which is great as well. So hopefully that's sort of
yeah,
a turn of the tide, that we're going to start seeing some things, moving.
yeah.
But yeah, that just getting a proper release would be the icing on the cake. But
Absolutely. If my book's done anything positive towards
yeah,
that, then I feel good about that.
yeah, and it's been very well
Um,
received from what I'm reading so far from everybody, and it seems probably better than me, but it was like number one in certain categories in Amazon, and
yeah, it was number one for about a week on Amazon US, which for me is amazing.
yeah,
I mean, I've been there for a day or two, but certainly not for a whole week.
yeah,
And it's remained the number one hot new release in Amazon US in the TV guides and reviews section. Um, of course, inevitably, when you write a book, you can't please everybody,
yeah,
and there are limitations to what you can do. For legal reasons and rights and things, sometimes you can't access things that you would like to put in a book. You'd love to have you know, behind the scenes pictures of how Fred Ward did his stunts or something.
yeah,
Yeah, so inevitably you're going to let some people down who are hoping for more. Um, I don't think I've ever written a book that didn't get at least a couple of bad reviews.
yeah. Well, I mean, if somebody's
um,
complaining about pictures, that's on
yeah,
them.
I mean,
It's like
it's a tough
there's
one. It
pictures.
really is.
Yeah,
I wish I could do more.
yeah,
And having said that, sometimes if I do find I'm able to add things in that people have requested, then I always will do an update, a
all right,
second edition. So as I mentioned, I did I think 4 editions of my Quatermass book because when I found that I could add something to it and expand upon it, I did. So, I'm always, I do pay very close attention to feedback and reviews. If I can do something, I will, and if I can't, then it's regrettable, because when you write a book, you want everyone to be happy. You want every person who buys your book and reads your book to love it. And if someone says they're bitterly disappointed, well, of course, I feel terrible about that every single time. I always think, oh, geez, that person's a fan, and I've let him down. I've failed him. So that's the downside of the work that I do, unfortunately, is that sometimes I don't deliver what someone particularly is looking for, and I feel terrible about it.
Yeah. Well, don't feel too bad about this book. It's great.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really pleased. Now when you said that that you liked it, and then one of your group members, who, I've been a member of your group, I think, for quite some time too now. I had been meaning to write this book for several years, and I had often said, I must do Spider-Man. I must do a book about Spider-Man. It deserves more recognition. It needs to be put in the spotlight. So another member said that it was a great read, or a really good read. So I thought, wow, that's really good. But ultimately, the book has gone over really well. I can tell you right now that it's been my biggest success I've ever had. I've been publishing books, as I say, since 2013, and I started doing it in earnest 3.5 years ago. Nothing I have published has ever gone over as big as this book.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
So
if you were to write a follow-up book, I'll not put you on the spot, is there anything that maybe you'd like to cover that you didn't have time or weren't able to with this one, or maybe didn't have the information to find out? Or
I guess maybe what I would like to, if I was going to add to it, thinking off the top of my head, what thoughts I've had now, maybe I should, take a bit more of a look at, could I perhaps describe in detail more about how the actual stunts and effects were done, what sort of techniques were used. Sometimes as a writer, when you've watched a lot of television and you know a lot about the medium, sometimes you can make the mistake of assuming the audience already knows what you mean by everything. Maybe people would be more interested sometimes in actually having it spelled out. Well, what did they do? How did they? What sort of things were done in this?
Yeah, I think too. With a book like this, obviously it's going to appeal mostly to the fans of the series, but I think if you can try and consider that maybe you want to try and reach people that aren't fans of the series, and as you say, you do have to spell things out, so because you can't assume that they're aware of everything, and it's beneficial to them if you do. So
I did wonder if maybe I should have talked about the comparison more with Tobey Maguire's films and Andrew Garfield and so on. To make some sort of points. I suppose, to me, the thing is CGI, or whatever they call it these days, the graphics, the computer-generated imaging, no matter how good it is, it's still a form of animation.
Yeah.
Whereas Fred Ward was in an actual outfit, they used to make that joke that the people who think the moon landing was fake, they would say, the moon landing was filmed by Stanley Kubrick, and then the people who disagreed with the moon landing deniers would make the joke that Kubrick was such a perfectionist, though he made them shoot it on location on the real moon.
Or do like 1,000 takes, or
do 1,000 takes, and it's got to be on the actual moon, because I'm not doing things without a real moon.
So one of the things in the book that you discuss at length is how CBS used the series as sort of a weapon against other shows. whenever they would air it against, especially the second season, they would maybe air it in competition with it. Is that quite
Yeah.
unique, do you think, in your experience of television shows, that a station would do that?
Yeah, I think they were extremely competitive, particularly in the 1970s and in America. And I think if you've got something which is a big ratings puller, um, and you put it up against whatever's rating well, you've got a chance of putting a little dent in their armor. So yeah, that's kind of something which is typical of television people at that time. There was also shows like um, Fantastic Journey with Jared Martin, which was a mid-season replacement for something else. And even though it was popular, it wasn't popular enough, so it just got yanked and
Right.
discontinued.
Uh-huh.
So there was a period I remember quite vividly in the 1970s where America was making a lot of shows that were really exciting for people who were into science fiction, fantasy, superheroes, and they would do well, but the networks would just go, "Oh, it's not doing well enough, or it's not getting the right demographic, or whatever," and they would just pull the plug on it, and it would end after 10, maybe 15 episodes, something like that, and never be heard of again.
Yeah.
So they would then sell those to Australia, to the UK, and in the UK and in Australia, they would rate through the roof. They would have massive ratings and they'd be hugely popular. And then everyone would be so disappointed. Why did it stop? We loved that show. Why did
Yeah,
it
I mean,
end?
the Spider-Man show in the UK, like I was too young to appreciate. I was born in '78, so I
Mhm.
was probably about three when it came out. To be honest, I don't remember watching it, but I must have watched it because I was a Spider-Man fanatic and Superman fanatic, and I vaguely remember watching one episode of the Hulk, and only because it scared me. This one scene,
Oh
and
yeah.
I went and had to look it up years later, and I was like, yeah, but didn't imagine that it really was a scene. So, but as I say, I would have probably did watch it, but I can't remember watching it, to be honest. So that's
Mm.
why. So
Well, there were a lot of ratings wars that went on between the big networks in the United
yeah,
States. So, that's the funny thing. And I think that's why I mentioned in the beginning of the book about how there was a sort of an irony of being, on the one hand, you're getting massive ratings. On the other hand, you're being treated like you don't matter and,
yeah,
getting axed and, things like that. Speaking of Space 1999 before, one of the things in my research on that show was the actor Martin Landau, who was the star of that. He'd been the star of Mission Impossible,
yeah,
and then he'd moved over to the UK to take on this role as the star of Space 1999. And he says in an interview, when you're trying to build a following, you're trying to get an audience to tune in each week to see these characters and what's going on with them and in their situations. And, so he said, consistent characterization was very important to him. And so he would sometimes have little clashes or, just discussions with producers because he was always fighting for this integrity of the characters to be very consistent. And I think that also extends to time slots. And I think that was one of the things you mentioned there, how it was moved around the schedule.
hmm
When you move something around a schedule, it really hurts its chance to build that consistent following. Because let's say, when you got no VHS recorder or you can't record TV yet, it's still the free to air period of the 70s. Let's say someone's coming home from work, they've got a certain period of time where they can watch television. If they're not interested in what's on one channel, they switch over to the other channel. Suddenly they discover it's Spider-Man. Hey, I like Spider-Man. I'm going to watch this. But then the following week, you've moved it up against Dynasty or something, or Dallas or The Man from Atlantis or something, because you're wanting to put a dent in its ratings.
yeah.
You know what I mean? So
And then your
where
mum
is
wants
it
to
now?
watch Dallas, so you can't watch Spider-Man.
Yeah, and then that guy hasn't got your wife loves Dallas, so you're watching that now, or your mum watches. You know, if you're a kid, your mum or dad want to watch the other show. You know, so,
Yeah,
damn, you know, or but if they've moved it out of its slot, then again it's that, as Martin Landau was saying, you're wanting to build a consistency for a following, and it becomes very hard when you know things are changing. You know, screening times and screening days. So yeah, America often made brilliant stuff, but sabotaged it for various commercial reasons in the 70s.
yeah.
And I think Spider-Man was a bit of a victim of that.
I think yes. I think
So it's,
Spider-Man obviously, had that sort of fantastical nature to it. There were a few episodes that touched on social issues, um,
yeah,
which I, as a child, probably wouldn't have, would have flew over my head. But as an adult, discovering the series in my twenties, it was like
mm.
it was a bit more mature than maybe I'm giving it credit for. Did you find that, or was there anything that stood out? Maybe
Yeah,
that.
no, I mean, I can, well, I mean, you know, I'm at the cinema watching Spider-Man Strikes Back, you know what I mean, having loved the first one. And straight away, we've got, you know, a jumper. We've sort of got an attempted suicide.
Yeah,
Then we've got, you know, the ethics of atomic power. We've got someone bringing plutonium there and student protesters, and they, you know, they and this extraordinary bit of dialogue, which I remember vividly stuck in my brain from as a kid, was Peter Parker saying, you know, that you know the information you need to build an atomic bomb is available in any good school library. I thought, wow, that's gee, you go to a library, a public library, and you can find the information how to build an atomic bomb virtually. I thought, yeah, that's all you need is the stuff, you know, the
yeah.
plutonium.
I'm
And then,
glad
of course, you have
I
the
didn't see that when I was young.
yeah, and then you have the great, you know, Robert Alder as Mr. White, who wants to, you know, carry out an act of nuclear terrorism, and he's trying to kill the president of the United States
Yeah.
and the General Assembly, and of course, you know,
But
this was
again,
the
even with
second
Mr.
one,
White,
so
it's more for financial gain, isn't it? It's
yeah, yeah. So you got the corrupt rich guy, and
yeah,
one of the most underrated characters I think is Angel, because the actor was enormous, you know. And he says, "I don't know how you did it, but Angel doesn't fail twice," you know. And he has this sort of contest of strength with him, you know. This is the guy who threw him off the building.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, so I really liked that. I thought Angel was kind of an awesome adversary, and I'd actually like to have seen more of a battle between those two, between
yeah. It would have
Spider-Man and
been
Angel.
nice to have
Yeah.
reoccurring characters throughout the show. It's something, maybe
Mm.
maybe that's not a common thing back then. I'm trying to think of other TV shows where you would have had reoccurring villains and
Yeah, probably Hawaii Five O. I think Steve McGarrett had a guy called High Fat who was his sort of criminal underworld enemy, or
yeah,
Woe Fat was it? Yeah, yeah, that was his name. I can't try and think of his name. Yeah, well, High Fat. That's funny. Sounds like I'm talking about a yogurt or something. You know? Yeah, no, he. Yeah, so that one. But mind you, that show ran for 20 years. I think when you have a show that runs as long as, or something like that, you know, or
yeah.
10 years, 10, 15
Spider-Man
years or
didn't get
something.
20
Yeah,
episodes. Yeah, so
yeah, exactly, exactly. You
yeah,
know, when you watch a show like, and you say, well, these guys had, you know, they had 20 years or 10 years, or you know, they had 7 seasons or something, and then you have other shows where they didn't get 7 episodes, or you know, they didn't get even 26 episodes for a full season. You know, it's really the fact that they made an impact on your life at all is a, you know, a tribute to how good they were. But yeah, I mean, this is something I've often thought about as a person who's sort of trying to assess uh, film and television and write about it. Is, you know, how much do you need to make a lasting impact? And I thought, you know, one of the biggest things of the 20th century was James Bond, and I mean, Sean Connery did 6 Bond films for Eon. You know, he did 5, then left, then did one more.
oh yeah,
Um, almost his entire reputation and him being known as Bond for the rest of his life and this incredible impact it had on pop culture all over the world comes down to, half a dozen movies,
Mm-hmm.
So when you think of it in those terms, there are TV shows where they did, half a dozen serials, that were like 4 or 6 half-hour episodes. So it's like 6 sort of movie-length storylines that were broken up into, uh, chapters, but they were movie-length if you watch them as a whole.
Yeah.
So if James Bond, can be such a massive impact from 6 movies for Sean Connery, well, and 7 for Roger Moore, then why not, 3 Spider-Man movies plus, a small batch of individual episodes,
Yeah.
some of which were very good. So, yeah, I think if something's good, that's all that should really matter.
I think that's one of the enduring things is Nicholas Hammond as Spider-Man,
Yeah.
And I think as well, just he seems to be just a nice guy in real life, and I think that's sort of help sort of keep the series sort of sort of easy to enjoy as an adult from being a child,
Yeah, Nicholas Hammond was wonderful, and I think the thing about him was that he had that really likable thing about him, and he looked like Peter Parker the way he looked in the 1970s comics. He really did. When I first saw him, I thought, this guy's perfect. It really seemed like Peter Parker had stepped straight out of the pages of the comic books and onto the screen. And but there's a couple of moments in the pilot where he does a big grin, after he takes off his Spider-Man mask. He's like, and he does this thing sometimes where he sort of one eye sort of goes a little sort of like that, and he looks a bit wide-eyed, So there's that little hint that this guy could be a little bit crazy and a little bit having too much fun, And I think that sort of is great because it speaks to the idea that, what kind of a person would dress up as a Spider-Man in a red and blue costume. It would be a guy who's a little bit of a nut and a guy who's a little bit, amused or tickled by it, getting a bit of a kick out of it, But having said that he had that earnestness, that sincerity, which I think is so important for Peter Parker. He's every very earnest, sincere little kid who just wants to be liked and understood and can't understand why people keep misunderstanding him and kicking him while he's down. He's got that little,
he's like puppy, at times there's like a naivety to him, but also he's probably the smartest person in the room at any time. It's a weird dichotomy, sort of.
Yeah, he's got that. Yeah, he's got this almost naive innocence about him at times. And but another line which stuck with me from seeing it in the cinema as a kid was when he got asked, what does Spider-Man wear? What does he wear? And he says, and he hasn't designed it yet, but he says he wears like a gym suit, and I think, oh, of course, he's like for sport or athletics, you wear like a tracksuit. So, and I suddenly thought about how sports people in tracksuits and things wear bright colors and things, and I thought, now it makes sense. The skin tight costume. It's an extension of you wear a costume which allows for you to be athletic and high visibility, brightly colored like a tracksuit, and then you add on to that, gloves so you don't leave fingerprints, and boots for your feet so you can run around, and a mask because he says, about how his anonymity is important because, being, well, let's face it, a vigilante, that's always the fear, is that things could come back, criminals could have reprisals against his loved ones if they knew his identity.
Yeah, and they make a point of saying that in the show as well, don't they? So, in one of the episodes. I guess in Spider-Man Strikes Back, I think. Yeah, so.
Yeah, and there's a great bit in Dragon's Challenge or Chinese Web where he, I thought it was really funny and clever, looking back on it now as an older person. One of the sort of common remarks that people used to make, and I guess it's probably in some ways now would be regarded as quite a racist or offensive remark, but people used to say that Asians all look the same. And I think there was a certain sort of irony where he's in Hong Kong and he gets shot with a dart and he passes out, and the girl takes him to an Asian doctor, and he just rips the mask off, and there he is, fully exposed. Spider-Man's Peter Parker right in front of this guy, and he just blank nothing. Like, he doesn't know who Spider-Man is, he doesn't care, he doesn't know who Peter Parker is. Yeah. And it was kind of like, oh, maybe all young, handsome American white people just all look the same to this guy. Maybe he took that attitude and inverted it and did it back to them. Like, who the hell's this guy? Just another brown-haired, blue-eyed American, young man in his 20s. He could be anybody.
Yeah. I think that is probably one of the things with Spider-Man, because wearing a mask, is anybody can be him. I think Nicholas Hammond's made that point in the past as well.
Yes, that is lovely, isn't it? That the idea that we can all be Spider-Man because you don't see any skin at all, and Nicholas Hammond even pointed out that it's often black kids who maybe grew up in a poor neighborhood or something like that, and maybe they didn't have a lot of chance to have sophisticated entertainment that people pay a lot of money for, but maybe they sat and watched their TV, and Spider-Man was a cool dude, that was a cool character, and if they saw Nicholas Hammond, it was, hey man, there's Spider-Man, so yeah, he said there was, and he said maybe they related to the fact that this was a character who once he's got that mask on, skin color is not a thing,
Yeah.
That's a lovely thought, that we could move away from this obsession with skin color, which I think is not good for the world, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Well, listen, just want to wish you continued success with the book. If anybody wants to get it, it's available on Amazon and Kindle softback. Is that the right term? Paperback.
Yeah,
and hardback
and hardcover. Yeah.
Yeah, I recommend the hardback if anybody wants it, because it looks great on the shelf. So it does,
Mm-hmm.
Thanks very much for joining us in the podcast, Adrian. And I know it's quite late there in Australia,
pleasure.
So
yeah, absolute pleasure to be here, and great talking to you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks very much, Adrian, and good night.
Thank you. Good night, and thank you for keeping the Spider-Man torch burning. May we one day see Nicholas Hammond's Spider-Man released on Blu-ray and digitally cleaned up and restored, so that a new generation can fully appreciate just how brilliant it really was. I think Hammond's acting and Fred Ward's amazing stunt work.
Yeah, because I mean, the difference between 35mm film, which a Blu-ray would be transferred from, and the VHS copies that we're all having to watch at the minute, it would be like night and day. So it deserves to be seen in that format. I think it really does.
It really does. And if my book does even a tiny little thing to, get people to push harder for that to happen, well, then I've done something positive.
Yeah. No. Well, you have either way. That's great. Thanks, Adrian. All the best. Thanks very much for joining me here. It's been a great chat.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah.